There are many who say the invasion of Ukraine bears striking similarities to Russia's military intervention in Georgia back in 2008. Now, once a part of the USSR, it gained independence when the Soviet Union dissolved back in 1991. Mikheil Saakashvili was the president of Georgia from 2004 to 2013 and had his own run-ins with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and he joins us now live from Brussels. And Mr. President, let's go back to that 1994 Budapest Memorandum signed by the U.S., Russia, and the United Kingdom guaranteeing the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. But Crimea is gone. Should Ukraine feel betrayed?
Well, you know, imagine if Ukraine had been a nuclear state now. There was no way Russia would ever contemplate to attack it. So that gives you an answer to your question. I mean, of course, I'm sure Ukrainians are regretting it bitterly. But the other thing is that Ukraine is not far away from restoring nuclear potential technologically. It has ballistic missile capabilities. It has fuel nuclear cycle, or, you know, it has enough scholars to do it and enough facilities. It just gave up its enriched uranium, but it can get it back. So, you know, that really opens up other options for Ukraine which are not desirable for the world, or indeed they were never asked for by Ukrainians, but they really counted that they were protected, and it turned out not to be the case.
You heard the Prime Minister address the Ukrainian parliament saying that if the West does not protect Ukraine, why should Iran, why should the other world powers believe that it will protect them if they disarm themselves on their nuclear programs? What signal does this send to Iran and the rest of the nuclear?
He has the point, and I spoke to him yesterday, and of course he is frustrated. Their country is in real big danger now, existential danger, and I hope that the world understands that Putin should be stopped now. I mean, they obviously are frustrated. The Budapest memorandums provided for some kind of guarantee. Now people might argue, well, about legalistic details, whether this was obligatory guarantee or not. But, you know, when they gave up weapons, they thought it was. And that was their understanding it was. So that makes no point. It's not about lawyers. It's about political commitment of the great powers to protect Ukraine.
Then let's talk about that. Do you think the West has the guts to take on Vladimir Putin and go toe-to-toe as much as it takes to stop this situation from escalating any further?
Well, for all these years, many people in the West swallowed the point and lie by Vladimir Putin that in 2008 Georgia attacked first. We had exactly the same situations in Ukraine. Unidentified soldiers came into our territory. They were attacking our troops. They killed our officers. They killed civilians. And then we responded. And then many people in the world, and also many media, some media people said, oh, Georgia attacked, and then Russia was compelled to repel Georgian attack. And this lie was fed, and this lie was swallowed because people didn't want to do anything about Russia's blatant attack on Georgia. Now, exactly at the same token, now we have this situation where Ukraine is under attack and people are hesitant. Well, what can they do? They can do lots of things. Vladimir Putin and his entourage are very vulnerable. They want to live like Stalin, but to rule like Stalin, but to live like Rockefeller. That means that all their kids are abroad. You know, their wives give birth abroad. They have their houses abroad. They have better bank accounts abroad. Now, America made first important step to go after corrupt entourage of Putin. Now, what they can really do, they should shut down Gazprom and Rosneft incomes. They should immediately start building LNGs all around Europe and continue to operate through their strategic resources of oil. They should freeze the currency accounts of Russia, because Russia has all this currency in euros and dollars, which means that Federal Reserve of the United States and the European Central Bank have full leverage over Russia. If they freeze their currency, the Russian government will be paralyzed. They, by the way, did this to the Iranian government after the hostage crisis in 1979. So it's all about political will now. There are many other instruments through which the West can, repel Putin. And indeed, it's either Putin will be on a rampage and continue to attack, or his attack should be reversed. In the end, Putin turned himself into a real dictator. And as we know from Middle East recently and from other places in the world, all dictators end the same way. The problem is that Vladimir Putin knows it himself. So he thinks that he can extend his existence through new attacks, through new adventures, through new onslaught on the West. And by the way, in his speech about Crimea, he spoke least of all about Ukraine. He spoke about America. He spoke about the West. He spoke
fact,
about the world, as if the whole world owes Vladimir Putin respect, which is, of course, total rubbish.
And Mr. President, I want to take you back to the last time you talked to Vladimir Putin. It was before the war in your country, in Georgia. You asked him if he saw the papers condemning him, and he had this to say. He said, yes, there are lots of pieces of paper condemning me. Why don't you roll up those pieces of paper and stick them in your, and I won't finish it because it's not kind at this hour of the morning. But does Vladimir Putin really care about what the West thinks about him?
Well, about papers, he doesn't care indeed, but about actions, he does. But the problem is that he is so cynical that he doesn't believe the actions will follow. And his so-called liberal Kudrin, the former finance minister, he, by the way, every time shows up these liberals when he wants some cover-up. Last time during Georgia wars, it was Mikheil Gorbachev, indeed, who was put there to justify the whole show. This time, this is Kudrin. And Kudrin said, don't worry, we will not have big long-term problems. We will have 6 months, maybe a little longer than after Georgia, but then things will go back to normal. And the problem is that it's not going to go back to normal. And the problem is that what he believes in, he can buy. Like he had Gerhard Schroeder, of former German chancellor, basically working for Gazprom. People like Schroeder that would tour the Western capitals, talk to the West about their interests, finance some politicians' campaigns, and then things will go away. But now I think this time this is an existential threat really to the existence of like international law, because if he gets away what he did, well, we can congratulate the world. International law is deceased, and if international law is deceased, the whole Europe can be reshaped, the whole world can be reshaped. Minorities are living everywhere. By the way, if you talk about whose territory was where before, Alaska was Russian territory in the past, like Crimea was Russian territory in the past, like minorities live all over Europe. What if they conduct referendum all over Europe? What if they conduct referendum all over Middle East, Asia? I mean, these are obvious issues. And so when you talk about this, obviously there should be obvious answer. And when you talk about American interests, people are, I've heard some Americans say, well, why we should care? We really force Vladimir Putin's hand too much.
Right. I want to cut you off because we have a lot more that we want to discuss with you, and I don't want you to go too far because I want to go in depth on a lot of the things that you're talking about. We're going to continue our conversations with the former president of Georgia in just a moment. We're going to take a short break, and we are going to be right back because this is a fascinating conversation. And Crimea now officially a part of Russia, at least as far as Russia is concerned. Today, the Russian parliament approving the annexation of Crimea. And just a short while ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin signing those papers, making it official. Now, the invasion of Ukraine, so many people are saying, bears striking similarities to Russia's military invasion of Georgia in 2008. Now, Georgia also once a part of the USSR and gained independence when the Soviet Union dissolved back in 1991. Mikheil Saakashvili was the president of Georgia from 2004 to 2013, and as you have heard in our last half hour, had his own run-ins with Russian President Vladimir Putin. We go back to him in Brussels again, and I want to go back to an article that you referenced. You said and went to this 1938 quote from then British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain on when he was referring to Germany annexing the surrounding areas, saying, quote, it was a quarrel in a faraway country between people of whom we know nothing. That was right before World War II started. Clearly, you know the inflammatory nature of your comments. Was that intentional or on purpose comparing Putin to Hitler?
Well, I mean, there are striking similarities. Indeed, it looks very much like Sudetenland. It looks like Sudetenland because exactly like back then, Germans said we have 2 million Germans and we need to protect them from Czechoslovakia. And indeed, I mean, if you look at the rhetoric of Vladimir Putin, his speech to his parliament, it's amazing how what he said, that Russia is a disunited country. Now, if you continue like that, then Russia has to go after north of Kazakhstan, has to go after much of Baltics, has to go after parts of Georgia, has to go after the whole Belarus, and Russia can continue on like that. But the rhetoric was strikingly similar to Hitler. But it's not only that Putin's rhetoric is similar to Hitler. Some rhetorics of some of the Westerners is very similar to Chamberlain. Indeed, we heard things like, well, let's get used to the idea that Russia has vital interests. Well, Crimea is gone. with like very quiet face, some important former U.S. officials saying that, well, for the same token, you can say, at the same token, you can say, well, Latvia is gone tomorrow. Well, some province of Poland is gone. Well, Georgia is gone. You can say things like that. And then you'll discover, like Winston Churchill said, that appeasers feed one victim after another to the crocodile and hoping that crocodile will never make it to them. Crocodile will eat all of this meat, but then go to the appeaser. So, so the idea is that I saw the other day, some comments in the U.S. press saying, well, we forced our hand too much. Well, Russia should not have been humiliated. Excuse me, but first of all, America did everything to accommodate Russia in the 90s. Second, what are we talking about? People in the streets of Kiev were not asking Americans. They were not. Are you repeating narrative of Vladimir Putin that was a CIA plot? And some Americans indeed are, because by saying, well, we did something too much, they're saying they're denying the right of people of Ukraine to have their own will.
Mr. President,
and that's the problem.
Pardon the interruption, but let me ask the question this way.
Sure.
As the former president of Georgia, when Vladimir Putin invaded, do you feel betrayed by the U.S. and West for not standing up more to Vladimir Putin then?
Well, we warned them continuously. Let's put it this way. Vladimir Putin was also warning them. He told at the summit in NATO, or around the time of summit, that there will be, he clearly implied there will be war and attack on Georgia. He told the same thing to the U.S. administration over and over again. He by the way, he said that Ukraine is a territory and it should be, implying that it should be sliced up. So not that he was not sending warning signals. He bombed Georgian military installations and civilian population for a couple of years before that, all the time, from time to time, basically sending signals and checking Western reactions. And of course, when we were screaming wolves, when we were screaming for help, they were saying, oh, you are just crying wolves, many people in the West. And when it really happened, there were lots of people who rushed to blame us because, they made a commission on an initiative of then German Foreign Ministry, which basically had also legal experts that said, well, all the basic facts are right. Russia indeed came in Georgia before Georgia responded, but technically, and and then went blah, blah, blah. And in the end, basically, they kind of blurred the conclusions, and then many people in the European Union said, well, the conclusions are not no clear, so let's go back to business as usual. So, of course, there were many things that could have been done better, and if things had been done in an appropriate way, Ukraine would never have happened. If things are not done now, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you believe then that NATO is a paper tiger? Do you believe that NATO has no teeth?
Well, I think NATO has lots of leverage if it uses properly. I think that NATO has strong say, but before it even goes to military options, as I said, there are so many economic options. But the economic options has one caveat to them: the West and its companies should be willing and wanting and able to pay the price for sanctions on Russia. It's like cutting out cancer. If you don't get proper chemical therapy, you cannot cure cancer. And the problem is that when you get this therapy, you get other functions of your organism damaged, but this is temporary damage in order to be cured. And that's the same thing on Russia. There are lots of Western companies now that say, well, gas price will go up, well, we'll lose this contract, we'll sell less vehicles in Russia, we'll do this, we'll that. But what about if there is a large-scale conflict in Europe? Because Ukraine is, the way Putin is behaving is exactly like Milosevic, but don't forget that this kind of Milosevic has nuclear button in his hand. So there is this thing that, every time they neglect the situation in Yugoslavia, every time Milosevic said, that's the last time I'm doing that. And then after a while, he did it again. So Putin is doing exactly the same thing. And even yesterday, I was at the EPP summit, and mostly people were saying absolutely right things. But there are lots of European leadership. But some of them still say, well, he promised us, Putin, that this will be the last thing. He's not going further. He was promising the same after Georgia. He is promising it now. Milosevic was promising this after Slovenia, after Bosnia, after Croatia. And still Kosovo happened.
If you have the ear of the President of the United States, I know that you talked to several senators on Capitol Hill. If you are talking to Barack Obama, President Barack Obama right now, what do you tell him? What's the next step you think he should take?
Well, I think the steps he has taken so far were important. I think it will really hurt Putin. But first of all, he should make clear that this will not be reversed, and that's what Putin believes in, that he will push Americans' hand back and he will reverse the sanctions. And second, go after Russian energy companies. That's the heart of Putin's corrupt regime. Go after Putin himself, indeed, because Putin is the most corrupt and man in the world today among officials, and certainly maybe the richest man in Europe. And certainly his money is decisive. Partly they went after his money by going after his bankers yesterday, but also go freeze their currency reserves, because most of them are kept under control of U.S. Federal Reserve. And once Putin is off the cash, this is not the guy who can operate without cash. Indeed, he operates with cash first and then with military after that. And so actually there are many things America can really do, provide the political will. And one thing should clearly be also said, repeating that, there is no military option. Well, we all understand that. But by repeating it like several times a day, it just somehow calms down Putin and reassures Putin. I remember back in 2008, Putin stopped after George Bush announced military humanitarian operation. That really helped. He stopped in a few miles from our capital. His tanks turned away because he thought that America meant serious business. And indeed, I think America did mean serious business. But then after a while, then Secretary of Defense Gates said, well, we don't have military option at all, and we are not going to take any military actions at all. And almost the same day, Putin went back and grabbed one more district in Georgia called the Halgoria and threw out population from here. So words said in Washington matter. And America is still the most powerful country in the world, but it should believe in it itself. And I think Vladimir Putin certainly believes in it, and we should not convince him otherwise. And that's why every word said now should be followed up by real actions.
I want to ask you about something else that you said. You said that you believe that Vladimir Putin is spoiling for what you call a hot war, and that Moldova is next. What do you mean?
Well, Moldova is very vulnerable. And Moldova is also a candidate for membership of the European Union, or might be prospective candidate for membership of European Union. And in Moldova, there is a region of Transnistria, which is exactly the same way as Russia controlled de facto our separate breakaway regions, where, by the way, separatism was stirred up by Russia itself, and they threw out most of the population. At the same token, there is Transnistria. But now there is the region of Gagauzia, and there are now also Bulgarians in the south of Moldova that suddenly are, they're suddenly becoming a next hotspot. Gagauz suddenly got lots of weapons. They formed their own national guard. And basically what we are getting now is some kind of flashpoints in 3 places in Moldova, and reinforcement of troops in Moldova. The problem will be that if Putin has to send, and I'm not speculating, but judging on his previous actions, his troops from Moldova, they have to go from Crimea. And from Crimea, it's cutting a corridor through the rest of Ukraine, and it also involves some kind of fighting with Ukrainian forces. So that's really a very dangerous situation. And we know that Putin is after Moldovans. We know that he wants to destabilize this country. But by the way, exactly the same way, I can imagine when I had my conversation with Putin, he was always talking about Ukraine, he was talking about Moldova, but he was also talking about Baltic countries. And Baltic countries has considerable Russian population. And what if there is major trouble there? Will the West be able to act there? Because they are small countries and they can be taken over very fast by Putin, judging by his Anschluss of Crimea. So there are lots of risk points.
Right, I've got a minute left, and that's why I'm cutting you off. I apologize for doing so. But in the minute that we have left, where do we go from here? What is the move forward? And is there any possibility that Ukraine, Crimea, and Russia can all live side by side?
Well, they are doomed to live side by side. I don't think Ukrainians are inherently anti-Russian or indeed Georgians or any others. The problem is that this Russia doesn't want to have neighbors. They want to have basically subservient peoples, that the colonies that will be, and they want some kind of recolonization. It's not going to work. And that's why I think we are facing lots of turbulent times. Eventually things will settle down, but what it will have, every dictator ended the same way, and Vladimir Putin will go away, fade away from the scene of history. And I believe that, but there will be another Russia, very transformed one. And this will lead to major problems inside Russia, what he's doing, because he's on the rampage, on attack now, but once this thing will be reversed, then Russia is going to get lots of problems. So there will be a moment when neighbors will be needed to help Russia itself, but that should be a normal Russia that goes away, takes away its troops, stops its imperialist policies, and becomes normal democratic state. But it's not as far as away as many people might think. I'm very optimistic and upbeat in long term, but it might get worse before it gets better.
Mr. President, I want to thank you for spending so much time with us this morning. And when you are in the States, we invite you. You have an open invitation to join us here at Al Jazeera America. And also, we can find you by satellite anytime you wish to talk as this situation escalates. Again, that is former Georgia President Mikheil Saakashvili joining us from Brussels this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.